Hey everybody, it's Jaraan, and I just wanted to take a moment to introduce you to this particular clip of Clarion having a conversation with SomRa about evolution, gateways, and things we can do to awaken, and things we actually need to know in order to be able to progress as effectively as possible. And I was actually blown away by these insights, and SomRa was too. Just like, this is something we need to share. And even though this was part of basically a personal dialogue that they were having, a personal conversation, still it's like she wanted to share this and get it out there. And I think it's really important because this is the kind of stuff that I don't see it talked about that often, and it's really important. We're all about the nitty gritty and getting down to the core and the foundation of things. It's like whenever I was a kid, I worked for a carpenter's helper, and I was really anxious about not doing a good job and all that sort of thing. And he told me, he said, "Look, there's as many ways to build houses as there are carpenters to build them. So you find the way that works for you." And that really stood out to me. But the thing that stood out most is when he said, it's like, if you get the foundation right, the house practically builds itself. And I've built enough houses and done enough remodeling to know that if the foundation is not right, then you're going to be doing an awful lot of extra work all the way to the roof and everywhere inside, because, if things aren't square, if they're not level, if they're not straight up and down, which is called plumb, then you end up having to compensate for all these things that are off. And I really believe it's the same thing is true for us, in our lives and our spiritual growth. And, it doesn't have to be that way. But, the world, and even in a lot of the spirituality stuff that's out there, it's like it's all focused on outer stuff. It's all focused on materiality and, making yourself comfortable and that sort of thing. And, we're in polarity. It's not about being comfortable. It's about progressing. And that discomfort is, it's a message to our consciousness to wake up. And it's also a message on how we're not awake. And so that's very valuable information that we need. So we can't really avoid discomfort. But we can get to a place where we're not uncomfortable with discomfort. And that's a really important point too. It's like you can't expect things to be la-di-da. It's not how it works. We're not there yet. It's like when we get into oneness consciousness, then we'll be in that place of bliss, that place of peace and joy. And, that whole, I think of it as like an effervescent upliftment. It's just, there's a radiance from your heart that's, it's kind of hard to describe. But anyway, we're not there yet. We're here. And that means stuff happens. But it's okay. It doesn't mean there's something wrong. It doesn't mean we made a mistake. It just means that, there's more work to do. There's more growth to be had. There's more expansion possible. And, the question I ask myself is like, what can I do? How can I become more aware? How can I become more refined? How can I, identify the things that are really in the way and resolve those so that I can experience more of the divine reality that's available? And, it takes what it takes. We're all on our own journey, but we're certainly not on it alone. We have tremendous support from the higher dimensions, guides and angels that are, helping us every step of the way if we'll accept it. And, it's important to do that. But anyway, I'm getting off on a rant now. I didn't really mean to do that. But this little snippet from Clarion, I think it's about 10 minutes or so, something like that, is like so mind-blowingly insightful. And so I wanted to share this and make sure that as many people as possible, if you're really into evolution, if you really want to awaken, then, what Clarion has to share in this video is pretty damn important. And so, have a listen, see what you think, see how it feels to you. But, I promise you, it's probably something you've never heard before. And it can be a valuable addition to your insight repertoire, if you will. And being able to see things, or just, accepting what Clarion is sharing in this can be really powerful in terms of how you evolve and, the choices you make to facilitate your evolution. So, anyway, give it a listen. Let us know what you think. And in the meantime, happy transformations. We'll catch you next time.
It's interesting because when you bring up that question, what we see are multiple timelines, some of which it's definitely happening and some of which it's happening, but at a much, much slower pace.
Mm.
So, and we're also seeing a lot of flip-flopping. It's like those timelines are overlapping and separating and overlapping and separating, that kind of thing. It's an interesting dynamic, not entirely unique, but also not common.
That's why a lot of us will feel like, it's happening this weekend, and then it doesn't. It's like we can feel it, and then it's just again.
Yeah. One of the things that also influences it, strangely enough, or ironically enough, is that, for those who have been aspiring to those changes, wanting to see more of heaven on earth, basically, just put it that way, they're also resistant to it because of what kind of changes that would mean. And it's like, well, can I get away with being angry? Or can I get away with being afraid? Or, how will I relate to the world if everybody's happy, based on their own reference point of being not particularly happy at times. And so it's one of those things where it's like, yes, I want it. Oh, I'm not so sure about that. Yes, I want it. No, I'm not so sure about that. Because when you really get down to it, it's like, how would you? And how would you get used to that? But that means really that the ego is just not understanding that if you're experiencing it, it's because you're, quote, quote, qualified to. In other words, enough is resolved that it's not a big deal. Or simply enough self-judgment and shame is resolved that you feel a part of it.
Mm.
Okay? Because there are a lot of people who want it, but at their core don't really feel worthy of it. And so that contributes to a lot of that flip-flopping too. There are a lot of subtleties, okay? And there's a lot of unconscious intricacies that most people don't even think about, much less know or influencing them on an unconscious level. And so, those sooner or later need to be addressed, but ultimately it still comes back to self-acceptance, self-love, self-validation. Absolutely. Self-acceptance, self-love, self-validation. If people practice those things to the best of their ability, then, things are going to progress. They're going to progress. They're going to rise in consciousness. Okay? Because still, egos are saturated with the notion that awakening or being enlightened is somehow about behaviors or specific behaviors. It's like, well, I'm going to meditate for 8 hours a day or whatever, or even 1 hour a day. Or it's about, service to humanity and that sort of thing. Well, that's true. It is about service to humanity. But it's not really about behaviors. It's about attitudes. It's about states of consciousness and cultivating a conscious awareness of one's authentic self, okay? To really tune into, when people talk about, living spiritually, we would say living intuitively may be a little more accurate, more specific, because it's moving from a ego-based foundation into a soul-based foundation. That's another way of characterizing ascension, basically, or enlightenment, or however you want to call it. And so when beings do that, it is an adjustment, because you're used to referring to whatever conditioning you have in your head to tell you what your reality is. And most of that is false. Most of what you think of as your reality is completely false. And yet most of the things that are your actual reality seem so foreign as to be threatening to the ego. And so it's like, can you handle that level of love? Well, probably not yet. Probably not yet. Because it'd be overwhelming. If we were to manifest in our full majesty, it would be overwhelming for people. And if your own soul was to manifest in its full majesty, it would be overwhelming for most people. So you start by practicing self-love, self-acceptance, okay? And in so doing, what you end up with is a much greater comfort level with it. It's like, oh, it's not this foreign thing. Some levels of the human personality are like, oh, yes, this is comfortable, this is natural, I can live with this, I can do this. But absolutely, where there's hidden shame or self-judgment, then those parts don't at all feel worthy or compatible with states of love or peace. Okay? And so it's those simple things. It doesn't matter how much good work you do. It doesn't matter how long you meditate. It doesn't matter about a lot of these, spiritual practices if you're not practicing self-love, self-acceptance, and self-validation. Okay? But if you are, then it pretty much doesn't matter what you do as a practice, you will be effective. So, anyway, I could rant on and on and on about all that, but that's basically it. So, those things put you when you practice self-love, self-acceptance, and self-validation, the way to say it is whenever you're willing to simply look upon yourself objectively, without judgment or justification, right? It just is. When you accept the isness of your experience, even the things you don't as an ego like, or don't imagine to be particularly good about you, when they can be just is for the moment, what you do is you create within yourself a state of being that is compatible with oneness consciousness. You naturally, by virtue of that experience, will open yourself to those higher levels of your divine presence. And then you begin to live intuitively. You begin to recognize that all the stuff you call stuff is really not that big of a deal. It's just not. And you also get access to much higher and much deeper, broader, richer levels of inspiration, divine inspiration. And so that the things that you used to struggle with stop being such a struggle, because your attitude is different. Your perspective toward yourself and the experience is different. It's at a much more elevated level. And so things that might have created distress in your psyche before are no big deal. It doesn't mean that there aren't things to do, to deal with stuff in this world, because this is polarity and there will be conflict in polarity. It's the nature of the game. But you can be at peace even in the conflict when you're coming from that more authentic place. And so, that's where it starts. Self-love, self-acceptance, self-validation. It's okay to be me, even if I'm not liking me very much right now. Even if I know I can do better, so to speak. It's okay. Because every mistake a human being makes is based on a misunderstanding. Okay? It's based on a fear or a false belief, as a general rule. There are very, very few exceptions we observe to that. So once the fears are gone, once the false beliefs are gone, then what you call a mistake is gone. But even then, mistakes aren't mistakes because they create opportunities to more consciously connect with your divine reality. So even a mistake isn't a mistake. It's just the level of development you're at. So accept it as such. It's not a deviation from the path, it is the path.